Welcome everybody to this week's collective learning meeting. Please remember to mute your microphones unless you want to ask a question. Feel free to ask questions at any time. And please also feel free to use the chat box. If you type a question there, I, Christine Tang, can ask the question for you. Our presenter today is Jean Bellinger. Jean is an American organizational theorist, systems thinker, and consultant, known for his work on systems thinking and knowledge management. Jean's primary pursuit has been the development of stories of relationships and their implications to provoke thought, foster deeper understanding, create insights, and enable more effective action. Please take it away, Jean.
And being a pain in the butt from time to time. So what I intend to present is sort of an overview of how I got to this point and how at certain points it was amazingly fascinating and other times amazingly frustrating. So I call it a journey of trial and learning because I can't stand the other phrase, which is trial and something I don't talk about. So this all started in 1975 when I sort of accidentally read Stafford Beer's Platform for Change. What an accident. It was sort of akin to what people tell me it's like taking mind-altering drugs, so that from the time that I read that, I was never quite the same. And to say I became an evangelist for systems perspective would be an understatement, to the point where people would ask me what I did, and as I began to tell them, you could see their eyes glaze over as they were asking themselves, why did I ask and how do I get him to stop? Though pursuing it, initially having real difficulties trying to understand. I mean, I don't have a formal education in this arena. It was sort of an accidental encounter. And when I started out trying to figure out how to build models, I'd start with a blank sheet of paper, which, not knowing where to start, sort of continued to result in a blank piece of paper, and it was a very vicious reinforcing cycle. It was very frustrating. And once I came to the realization that it's all connected and it doesn't matter where you start, you can start anywhere, starting with what it is that is the problem, and what you are trying to understand usually works a little bit better. So I went on to develop qualitative models and some quantitative models, though you need to realize that in this time frame, doing quantitative models is something like GPSS on an IBM 360, where you spend hours doing punch cards and you then turn them into the computer center and they run it overnight and they give it back to you in the morning telling you have an error on column 47 of card 27 and you have to correct it and resubmit it. And it was just about as interesting as watching paint dry, but it was sort of the only thing that was available. When I read an article in Scientific American in 1991 that talked about Stella being available for my Mac. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. But as I continued to study in the field, I was bothered by the fact that there seemed to be so many models and methods that claimed to embrace the systems paradigm. And it was driving me nuts because I remembered the stuff that I read by Bertalanffy, where he said that there was basic fundamental underlying models that operated across all branches of science. And why was it that we needed 2,000 some models and methods to help us understand how to deal with our problems? And fortunately, I ran into Michael C. Jackson's Systems Thinking Creative Holism for Managers, and he offered this model that talked about systems being simple or complex and the participants being unitary, pluralistic, or coercive. And he said, within this context, there are certain approaches that are useful. And in different contexts, you need different approaches because of the nature of what you're working with and who's working with it. And all of a sudden, I began to get a sense of why it was useful to have lots of different approaches. And after pursuing a deeper understanding of 2 or 3 of them, I said to self, you're not smart enough to know all this stuff. It's just, there's too much. So I finally boiled it down to realizing that the underlying thread, or the simplicity on the other side of complexity, is that it's all about relationships and their implications. And I don't need all of the different approaches. I can go ahead and boil it down to 3 recurring structures that are the foundation of everything that we build. I defy you to find me a model that's not composed of those 3 structures. And an aside, a couple of weeks ago, I realized, or I thought that I had come across or come up with a new approach for communicating, instructing, helping people understand system dynamics. And I thought about it for a couple of days, and then I realized that I wrote it all down 5 or 6 years ago. So the stuff gets so convoluted that you lose track of what it is that you're doing. But based upon this understanding, I was feeling really froggy. And I developed a certified system thinker program. And people thought that I was a little presumptuous, and I probably was. But a lot of it was based on the archetypes, because these 3 fundamental structures go together in ways that produce a number of foundational structures that, as Berlanti said, they operate across all branches of science. The thought first didn't sit well until I realized that within one universe, all of the branches of science are a fabrication of man, not nature. So why wouldn't there just be one set of structures that operated across all branches of science? And I came to really appreciate archetypes, because an archetype has a well-defined structure with a characteristic pattern of behavior, and there are well-defined approaches for dealing with each one of the archetypes. So I put together this certified systems thinker program, which a person could do in 2 or 3 days if they applied themselves. And it was primarily from a qualitative perspective, not actually doing system dynamics. And the first reviews that came out of the program were so good that I thought I was being had. And it continued. And then a couple of students went through the program, and they said to me, okay, this is marvelous. How do I sell systems thinking to my organization? After I recovered from the meltdown, I spent about a week thinking about the question and why there wasn't an approach to sell systems thinking to your organization, because it was a fool's errand. At the same time, I'm pursuing an understanding of archetypes and trying to figure out how to simplify a model. And this was an aha moment that was just fabulous. This is a model that was developed by Jenny Tsao and somebody, but it was and Andrew Fangus, and it was very well put together. And I said, how do I simplify this, because to make it understandable to someone else? So I tried the first approach, and the simplification was as bad as the original model. But in the process of doing this, I had an aha moment that was just amazing, in that this is, in fact, 2 shifting the burden structures stuff together, so that this is that part of the model, the avoid births is this part of the model, and the avoid pregnancy is this part of the model, so that this whole structure that it's easy to get lost in is a couple relatively simple archetypes stuffed together with the realization that there's two relationships that ought to be here that aren't there because they were missed. So the idea was to continue to pursue this understanding of archetypes, but what do I do with it? Because you can't sell systems thinking to your organization. And at the same time this is happening, I have spent years inflicting my models on other people. I would develop models and I would send them to other people because I wanted to impress them with how smart I was. You know, anybody else ever had that approach to things? And after what I sent them made their head hurt for a while, they would send back a comment like, "Oh, that's nice." But what they really wanted to say is, "Why the hell did you send this to me?" The realization was I made a connection between a model and a play. If you go to the theater and you sit there and you watch the play, you watch the relationships unfold between the actors from one act to another. When you leave the theater, you take the story with you. What I was doing was akin to having the playwright walk up to a person, hand them the script, and 5 minutes later say, "What do you think?" There is simply no way that a person can comprehend that piece of work in that form in that period of time. So that was when I finally got to a point of starting to create a lot more videos about models and unfolding them the way that I'm unfolding this, so that there's not a lot of stuff to read. You can listen to the description as the model unfolds. And if I tell a halfway decent story, when I get to the end, people understand the set of relationships and the implications of them. But now I'm back to still dealing with this problem about how do I sell systems thinking to my organization. And I came up with 5 sort of pieces of aha moments that describe why you can't do that. So the first one was people always do exactly what makes the most amount of sense to them in the context of the moment based on their current understanding. Now, I have argued that point with dozens and dozens of people, and as soon as somebody finds me one white crow, I will change my mind. But to this point, that seems to be something that you can take to the bank. The implication is that if you do something that makes no sense to me, it's not because of something you don't understand, it's because of something I don't understand. Because if I were you, I would be doing the same thing. Right? Now, it's difficult to stop catching yourself looking at other people and thinking about them not making sense, as opposed to trying to understand why what they're doing makes sense to them. So that was the first point. The second point was, have you ever been in a department store, wandering around looking at things and having a sales clerk come up to you and say, "May I help you?" The typical, now some people say yes, but the typical response is, "No, I'm just looking." And I thought about it and I realized why that's the response, because the sales clerk has just discounted you by implying that you need help. And the story that runs through your head in a microsecond is, how can this person be so presumptuous as to think I need help? I'm perfectly capable of helping myself. So that linked back to in the 80s, Spencer Johnson wrote a book called The 1 Minute Salesperson. And in it, there's one line that I took from the book. And it is, while almost everyone loves to buy, almost no one likes to be sold. And we've been selling systems thinking to the world forever, and they ain't buying, or they aren't buying to the degree that we think they should be buying. And guess whose problem it is? It's not theirs, it's ours. So I finally decided that the first rule of Fight Club is not to talk about Fight Club. So the first rule of systems thinking is not to talk about systems thinking. If you're interacting with a group of people who are already drinking a Kool-Aid, well, you can talk to them about systems thinking. But if you're talking about a group of people who don't already understand it, the worst thing you can possibly do is go to them and say, well, if you're going to solve your problem, you have to learn systems thinking. Go away. I don't want to hear it. And then Buckminster Fuller said that it's a waste of time to try and change people's minds. If you want them to think differently, you have to give them a tool that enables them to think differently. And the tool is you. The systems thinker is the tool that enables people to think differently, though you have to do it in a stealth mode, okay? So that the last part was from oh, come on, who's it from? It wasn't Lao Tzu, it was, the thought was, if you honor people, they honor you. And when the sage has finished his work, the people will say, we did it ourselves. So that the approach that, well, it was this and this and this, and it all came together in a book that I read by the Heath brothers called Moments. The Heath brothers, Chip and Dan Heath, have written a half a dozen books, but they all seem to be chapters in a single book, which is how to change things. And they said, what you need to do is you need to help people trip over the truth. You take a clear insight, compressed in time, delivered in a manner that allows the audience to discover it themselves. So the audience has an aha moment. You know, and one of the examples that they talk about is this CEO of the company has been trying to get the people in the company to participate in the 401k program with very little success. What he does is he gets this whole pile of money and puts it on the table in a conference room. And he calls all these people in, and he explains to them that this money on this table is all the money that went in my pocket last year because you didn't participate in the 401k program. Now, at the end of next year, do you want this money in my pocket or your pocket? He wasn't attempting to convince them of it. He was simply asked them a question from a perspective that allowed them to go, oh, why shouldn't I get some of it? So they did. So the idea is to do this, it's much easier to say than it is to actually do it, right? I have done some that I think are close. This is a model that was repurposed numerous times, that was initially part of what Scott Fortman and I did for Beyond Connecting the Dots. And it was an accidental creation that has developed more and more meaning over time. So I'm sitting at the table in the morning having a pleasant breakfast, and my wife yells down from upstairs, are you finally going to clean up that unsightly growth around the bird feeder today? I'm getting sick and tired of looking at it. And all of a sudden, when it happens, this whole pattern of relationships unfolds in front of my eyes saying, how did I get myself in this predicament? The situation is that I deal with a lot of ongoing frustration, and the frustration distracts from me having a pleasant practice. And it's a vicious reinforcing cycle. Though over the last couple of days, there's been a lot of birds outside on the railing, and they've added to creating a pleasant breakfast, which helps me deal with my frustrations. And after this happens for a few days, I decide that I'm going to install a bird feeder. The reason being is that it will increase the birds at the feeder and increase the birds outside, which will help me create a more pleasant breakfast. And when I do that, it attracts more birds and more attractiveness to the garden, which adds to the pleasant breakfast. And this is just absolutely delightful, except for I forgot about the fact that I have to buy bird seed. And if you've checked the price on bird seed, it's not cheap. So that having to buy bird seed adds to my frustration on an ongoing basis. And the birds at the feeder increases the spillage, which increases the need to buy bird feed, which produces the unsightly growth, which increases the frustration, and it goes on, so that the spillage creates rodents, and I have to figure out what to do with the rodents. And then the bird feeder attracts the squirrels, which decreases the birds at the feeder, which increases the need to buy bird seed, which increases the spillage and the rodents and all the rest of this stuff. So the question is, oh, and now the birds are also pooping all over the railing, and I have to go clean that up. So the question is, what's the real problem? Well, I'll let you think about that for a bit. The other one was the future of society. I have read a number of books about the evolution of society and empires and how they go through life cycles, and came up with this model or this level of understanding about if you create an exclusive political system, that's a political system by a few for the few, that tends to promote an extractive economy, which is an economy which promotes the wealth of a few at the expense of everyone else. And the wealth of a few further promotes the exclusive political system, and you end up with a successful structure that diminishes prosperity for all. If you are fortunate enough to have an inclusive political system, which is a political system by the people, for the people, because for the benefit of all, it creates an inclusive economy that is intended to promote a prosperity for all, and therefore you have a virtuous reinforcing structure that further promotes an inclusive political system. The difficulty is that out of this reinforcing structure, there always seems to be a few that do better than others, and they really like that. So what they do is they use their wealth to promote an exclusive political system, which diminishes the inclusive political system, and you have a balancing structure, which is a seeds of corruption. The exclusive political system then promotes an extractive economy, diminishing the inclusive economy, and you have a balancing structure leading to an economic demise. And the extractive economy further promotes the wealth of a few, and you have a successful structure diminishing the prosperity for all. And the question is, have you ever played Monopoly? What did you learn? This is it. So the idea is to figure out how to take the insights that you develop from investigating a set of relationships and presenting it presenting that the aha moments that you have in a way that allows other people to have aha moments, as opposed to trying to convince them that what you have come to understand is what they should understand. I was, I don't know, 25 years ago, maybe longer, I wrote a paper called Change Management, the Columbo Approach. I don't know if some of you may remember. Columbo was a detective who wandered around constantly badgering criminals, asking them to help him understand things that were confusing to him. And he annoyed them so much that they finally ended up confessing. But the approach was that rather than accusing the criminal and pursuing them, it was an approach where he was discounting himself in an endeavor to understand. And I accidentally, I did one workshop, the best workshop of my life. It was an accident. I went to a conference and I was supposed to do a 4-hour workshop. And I forgot it was a workshop. I prepared all the stuff that I wanted to talk about. And even I wouldn't want to listen to me for 4 hours. And at breakfast, it dawned on me that I had to do a workshop in about 10 minutes for 4 hours. And I have nothing prepared. So as I'm finishing my coffee, I invented a workshop. So I walked into this group of 30 or 35 people sitting at a number of tables, and I said, take out a piece of paper. On a piece of paper, create a dot and label it cat. A few inches away from it, create another dot and label it mouse. Draw an arrow from cat to mouse and label it cases. You've now created your first relationship model, and if you feel faint, you should leave now. The group was absolutely out of control for 4 hours. And at the end of 4 hours, they were creating extremely elaborate relationship models and telling stories to each other about things that they were dealing with in their life. And I don't think I taught them anything. I think they simply asking them questions to draw out an understanding, because they know how a savings account works, and they know about filling a bathtub, and you can simply ask them questions to get them to realize what it is that they already understand. And that's the reinforcing structure and the balancing structure. And as soon as they had those pieces, they could build anything they needed to. So this is where I am. Oh, well, this is where I am at the moment. And I was feeling really froggy and decided that I was going to do this thing called the Phoenix Project, which is trying to put some kind of order in 800 videos and several hundred models. And the project is so overwhelming, I can't get myself to work on it. But so I'm done. Questions? Is anybody still awake?
Yes, and Sam said in the chat that the philosopher you might have been referring to is Confucius, maybe?
Yes, yes. Thank you. I have those senior moments, and they seem to come more and more often.
It's okay. Anybody have any questions, or comments, please feel free to unmute yourself or type in the chat. And Sam also said, I also had trouble with my breakfast birds and rodents.
Would anybody like to comment about what's the real problem?
In the beginning of the story, you said your wife wanted you to clean the undergrowth. Is that what you said before?
Yes, you clean up the unsightly growth around the bird feeder. This, what structure, what archetype is this? It's another shifting the burden archetype. Here's the underlying foundational problem. It's my frustration. So rather than dealing with or figuring out how to deal with the frustration, I'm doing all this stuff. So the foundational underlying problem is I'm stupid. Okay? I think I acted before I thought about the implications of my actions.
You're not stupid. I don't like to say that.
I do it on an ongoing basis. I get myself in trouble. And the thing is, I know better. I have repeatedly proven that I know better, but I still end up doing it.
Sorry, I have a comment about this.
Yes.
Like shifting the burden problem. I believe it is like a common way of overcoming any blockage in any like exploration or whatever, because when there is not enough resources, or you are not aware of some direct paths you can explore in like more dimensions, other ways, and this is not always bad. Because it's how people grow their knowledge, in a sense. If you stuck with one problem, it is better to create others and learn other things, and maybe later you can come back.
Which is why I prefer the phrase trial and learning as opposed to trial and error. I absolutely agree with you. There are certain things that I don't believe we can figure out the answer just by thinking about it. There are things where we have to do things to learn enough. You know, I continue to say I think Nike has the right answer. Just do it. Just make sure that the things that you're learning from don't put holes in the boat below the waterline. Okay. Did I? Christine, did I send you the link to this model?
I don't think so. And Tom.
No.
Oh. Hello?
Yeah.
In the chat, Tom said trial and success is also useful.
Oh yeah, that's very good. But I just put a link in the chat, which is to the model itself, from which all the pieces. This is just a presentation from this model.
Gene, I'm curious to ask the small group here if anyone else has used Kumu. I've used Kumu quite a bit in the last year or so. I'm just curious to know if anyone else has been using it other than you and I.
I have not.
So, Sam, I spent 3 years working with the developers, and a friend of mine in Argentina sent me an email and said, "You need to go look at Kumu." He knew that I've been looking for something to do storytelling for years, and I went to create a username and password and found out I already had one. I'd looked at it several months before and said, "Nah, it's not there." But the developers had been working on it, and I managed to connect with them. And I spent 3 years working with them, and they gave me 90% of what I asked for. So that as long as I could explain to them the utility of something, as opposed to just, wouldn't it be nice if you did this? So that it is my preferred vehicle for doing storytelling. Though it used to be relatively straightforward and simple to use, but the developers never stopped. And now it has a gazillion options so that a person can go to Kumu to create a model and get lost in the options and forget they came to create a model, because there are so many shiny objects.
So to clarify, can Kumu run system dynamics models, or is it just
No,
diagramming?
it's just qualitative.
And the value that I find in it, and I don't know if this is intended, Gene, it's just the ability to document to your heart's content of every link and every variable and loops, and you can there's so much power to document what you're getting from your qualitative information in your qualitative modeling, and I don't see that anywhere else.
And the other thing that do you have an organizational account?
On some of the projects that I work on, we do use an organizational account, yeah. And some of them we just use the student account, depending on who's funding the work.
Okay. Here, there were a whole bunch of us that worked on this project. There was some of us that wanted to understand the sustainability of a rural community food system. And I'm not going to try and explain this because it's a mess. But what Kumu allowed us to do was we actually conduct, for every one of these dots on here, what that dot represents is a discussion that was carried on between the participants about some aspect of the model. And you can start a discussion about any particular element, any connection, any loop, so that we had 75 open discussions and 59 closed discussions about this model as we were developing it. And I don't know another environment that allows us to do that amount of interaction on an ongoing basis to keep track of all of the things that we were pondering and thinking about. And as it turned out, the group actually created a whole bunch of different, each one of these represents a different perspective on this set of relationships.
And all of these are publicly available through your systems thinking world on Kumu, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, okay. If I said that I am not finding much success in causing me to work on this, but the link I just posted is a link to this project, and it will give you access to everything that I have created to date via, all of the videos about different aspects of Insight Maker are in there. There's a thing on Insight Maker storytelling. There's a thing on Kumu storytelling, and just so.
So what you're doing is trying to make available to the world all of the things that Gene Bellinger has done over the past 20 years for things tools that they can use and models. Is that right?
No, all right. So what I know is mostly irrelevant compared to what you know and think about what you're working on. Okay, is that okay? What I have tried to do mostly is figure out what I understand, and I tend to try and write it down because, it's amazing. I look at models that I did 3 or 4 years ago and I say, what was I smoking when I did this? Because it's completely wrong, and nobody's called me on it. But if I hadn't written it down, I wouldn't have had that learning to go with it. And to your point about the environment being able to make comments on it, it's just, you can describe what you were thinking because the labels are not sufficient. And in the Insight Maker environment, it's almost as good in terms of being able to adds comments to just about anything, so that these are comments on different elements in the model.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, insight makers, that the brainchild of one Scott Fort Monroe that he spent 5 years developing, and it's free.
So going back to Sam's question, Rafet said he started using Kumu a few years ago about to trace the evolution of the field of system dynamics with Tim Clancy. But stopped using it for a certain time, but wants to go back to using it.
Is there some aspect of it that you're having a hang up or something?
He says in the comment, yeah, Rafet, you can just export everything from your map into a spreadsheet. You could just press X when you're looking at it, and it'll create an Excel spreadsheet instead of Google Sheets. I know that Google Sheets might be better for sharing, but you could go back in and create a new one.
So what we did, we started in a Google Sheet, documenting dates and events. So that was our working document. And then we linked it to Kumu. So we will create those links. So our work was continuously to update that Google Sheet. But then after some time, we stopped because of other things, you know, other priorities. And then coming back, we lost that connection, and I just couldn't figure it out. So
okay, so you weren't able to export. If you go back into the map again, you just press X, and then it will export an Excel sheet.
Okay, I'll try
everything
that
you have inside the map, and you can start the Google Sheet over again after that. I haven't used Google Sheets with it, but yeah.
Yeah, we used Google Sheet because we were collaborating. So we were on and off. Everybody just goes in and adds something over time. But thank you for the tip. I'll try that. Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, hope it was of some interest.
This is Tom Clifford. Can
Yes,
everybody? When you started, you approached people with the idea of systems thinking and how it might help them address their issues, whether their business systems were counterintuitive and not working according to what they were thinking it should. But when you approach someone in that way, you say the best thing to do is give them a tool that will allow them to give them insight over their the problem they're addressing, and perhaps how to make it work better for them. And I thought back to my days in my bachelor's and MBA at Northwood University, and I remember reading an article about archetypes, and this one fits shifting the burden, but it's shifting the burden to the intervener, which would have been you. And that's, I think that's something that we have to be careful of too, because the people we're working with are the subject matter experts on their system, we are not. And so we have to rely on them, ask the right questions, and show them that our model will actually give them what's really going on in their system as far as data goes, and maybe work through that and help them figure out why it's acting the way it is, which they don't like. So that's go ahead.
Well, down to this point about, you know, trying to figure out how to approach it from the perspective that when you have finished, they believe they did it themselves. And some very wise person who invented system dynamics wrote more than once that people learn best when they build their own models. So rather than going to people and talking to them about system thinking, you go to them and you ask them to help you understand, have them help you understand what it is that they're wrestling with. And then you ask them questions about, well, what influences this? And what influences this? I've come to believe that there is actually only one question, which comes in two forms. And the question is, and what does this influence, and what influences this? And you simply continue to ask the same two questions over and over and over again until you run into the limit of relevance. Sometimes you're at the wrong, you think relevance is at a different point. Sometimes you find that relevance is at a different point than you think it is. Though, if I begin with what it is, the problem that I'm wrestling with, and begin to ask those two questions to build a set of relationships that I can understand from that point outward, I don't have to worry about where the boundary is. The reason I don't model systems is then I have to figure out where the boundary is. If I model problems, the problem helps me determine the boundary when I run out of relevance. Though to have people build the model, and you continue to ask these questions, and you get them to actually create a model on paper. You don't tell them that they're building a model. You just say, well, write this down as you're telling me that this influences this and this and this. And then after you do this for an hour or so, they begin to say, what are you doing? And when they open the door, then you can begin to give them a sense of what you're doing, but not too much at once. Mice like cheese.
Yeah, I don't want to make people feel, I don't want to overwhelm people.
Right.
I want to give them a map of their system they're having trouble with, and quite often they can, I don't have to offer a suggestion that this is the issue you're facing and this is how we might solve it. They see it themselves.
Any of you remember Tom Peters? Peters and Waterman wrote In Search of Excellence in 1984, I think it was.
I do, yeah.
Tom was, I love to listen to his videos because he was just such a dynamic presenter. But in one of his videos, he's talking about, he met this guy that was a turnaround expert for companies. He'd go into one of these places that was hurting, and in a few months he would turn it around, and he just did this over and over and over again. And Tom talked to him. He said, what's your secret? How do you manage in all these different areas to turn these companies around? And he said, well, it's not difficult. He said, I go in and I wander around, and I talk to people, and I ask them what the problems are, and they tell me, and I say, well, why don't you fix it? And they do, and I get rich.
Yeah. Sounds simple.
My idol is Ricardo Semler. Wrote a book called Maverick about the transformation of a company that he took over from his father in Brazil. And Semco was a mecca for CEOs for years. Though once they found out the secret, they were scared and they ran away because it was just too easy. What he did was he relinquished control to empower the people to run the business. And he's found out over the years that they can actually be very good at it. In the book, he talked about one place he different departments in the organization, he taught them how to run their own businesses. And there was one segment of the organization who decided that he was charging them too much rent. So they moved out. And he said he don't know where they moved to, but it doesn't matter because they always deliver on time. In other words, he's focusing on the part that is really important, not trying to control things.
Yeah, I heard a quote, not I think last year about data science. Data science is a series of failures punctuated by the occasional success. And you can't go into a place and just say, well, I'll solve everything for you. You have to partner with them. You have to give them the chance to make mistakes and give yourself a chance to make mistakes. But they're the people who run the business, and you have to go with what they're doing and what they're trying to do.
I just posted a link to a TED Talk that Ricardo Semler did. A magical guy. He taught in the MBA courses at MIT for a while.
Thank you. And Jean had a question for the audience. When I asked for the short description in his bio, he asked, what are your greatest aha moments as you pursued understanding relationships and their implications? I don't know if anybody would like to share, please.
Well, I'm pretty much a noob when it comes to actually going out in organizations. And this is Tom again, by the way. I studied system dynamics and Peter Senga in the 90s for my bachelor's, and we touched on it occasionally in my MBA classes from 2011 to 2013. And I retired from software development last December, and I'm looking for a way I can use system dynamics to perhaps help businesses do better or help them understand how they can do better. So I don't have any real experience going out and doing this yet. But I think it is something that I can really use my bachelor's and MBA experience and knowledge to assist people. So I don't know what everybody else is, what stages you're all at, if you're out doing it or out teaching it. But I'm putting out feelers for it just to see what I might be able to do, assist, maybe doing using Diana Fisher's first course to put together a basic introductory course for I don't know if it would work in grade school or middle school or high school, but I'd just like to use it somehow.
Have you connected with the Waters Foundation or with Creative Learning Exchange, or both?
The Waters, you said it was.
Tom, I sent you my email. I dropped my email in the chat. Why don't you send me an email, and we're only Zoom away.
Okay, I will do that, sir. Thank you for your help. I actually discovered after I saw the advertisement for this on Facebook. I went to Amazon and bought Mr. Beer's book. It was $50, but I think it may be a very good thing to reorient my thinking from putting a model together to doing relationships. So I'm exploring that, and I will, if I have any questions about it, I will ask you.
Yeah, and it's an open invitation. Anybody listening, if you want to chat, just send me an email. We're only a Zoom away.
Thank you.
So I'm retired, by the way.
Yeah.
I have been for 20 some years now. So.
Yeah. I hope my retirement lasts at least that long.
Thank you. And in the chat, Al said, my biggest aha, whatever you think is obvious, isn't. So
This
things are not
sounds
obvious to others or to yourself.
Ranks right up there with if you think you can, or if you think you can't, you're right.
We have 1 minute left. Does anyone else want to chime in?
Yeah, I have a comment.
Just for fun.
Thank you, Gene, for sharing this interesting story. But I feel stuck because I think in 2 weeks I'll be on Instagram Live with the society, and the part of the topic is, why would be nice to study or learn about systems thinking? So now I have to figure it out.
Oh, well, so I tell people sometimes that I'm a recovering systems thinker, that I am now a storyteller. I help people develop stories about relationships and their implications. And people say, well, doesn't that sort of relate to everything? And I say, yeah, that's the curse. It does, it relates to everything.
I'll use that. Thank you.
Thank you. We're at the top of the hour. I don't know if anybody wants to stay or go, but it's lunchtime for me, but I'm willing to stay a couple minutes if anybody has any parting thoughts or comments.
Well, thank you, Gene Bellinger, for doing this for us. It's a good, great perspective on, what our profession really should be, helping others.
Oh, and Tom, the stage that I'm at is called learning.
Yeah, we're all students. I consider myself a student still.
Yeah. All right. Bye, all.
Thank you very much, Gene.
Thanks, Christine. Thanks, Gene.
Yes, and thanks, Christine. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.